Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. I am Sandy Orozco, CHCI Housing Postgraduate Fellow. I am delighted to be with you today for the special occasion, our moment in history, Latinos at the decision-making table. I grew up in Aurora, Illinois, as the proud daughter of immigrants from Mexico City and Michoacan, Mexico. My Latina identity has helped me appreciate the value of hard work and has influenced my aspirations towards a career in public service. It's an honor being able to introduce these cabinet members who have shown that anything is possible for Latinos and deepened my desire to one day serve the nation in a similar capacity. It is my honor to introduce Marco Javis, the president and CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. This session will be exciting, informative, and a timely conference. Please join me in welcoming Marco Javis.
Thank you so much, Sandy. We appreciate all your work and all your leadership in your community before you got here and all the incredible work you're doing here in Washington, D.C. I am so excited to welcome you all to this session. To our knowledge, this is the first time that the 4 members of the President's Cabinet who are of Hispanic descent are gathered together in a public forum. And we are And we're so excited to hear from them about their leadership journeys, about the incredible work that they're doing on behalf of the people of the United States, and how they represent our community proudly. To kick off our session, I'm very happy to welcome the moderator, Ana Cabrera. She's an award-winning journalist and host of MSNBC's Ana Cabrera Reports. Her extensive news presentation includes breaking news on the white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, Hurricanes Harvey and Maria, and DACA. So please join me in welcoming Ana Cabrera.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is truly such an honor to be here and to be part of such an inspirational group of people. And as I look out here to see so many Hispanic leaders representing your communities and our country. And, you know, I just want to re-emphasize something we heard from Marco, and to think right now in this country, we have 4 Latino members of a presidential administration. That's huge. You know, representation, we all know, matters. Having a seat at the table really matters. And so before I introduce our guests today and hear some of their stories about their personal journeys, the work that they're doing right now, and their goals, I just want to share briefly a little bit about my background. I'm from a family of Mexican immigrants that came to the U.S. around the time of the Mexican Revolution, and my great-grandparents were fleeing violence, seeking a better, more stable life, more secure life here in the U.S. when they came. And as some of my relatives have shared, my great-grandfather on my abuela's side was a member of law enforcement at that time and got into an altercation with Pancho Villa's gang and ended up in a shootout of some sort with a member of his group. And so he personally became a target. And that was the push factor that brought our family to the U.S. And so that's just a very small piece of my family's humble beginnings here in this country. And so I certainly don't take for granted how far we've come. And, you know, my own personal position now as a Latina, as a mother, as an anchor of my own national news program. And I thank you. I certainly recognize and respect the power and the privilege that comes with this role. And so thank you for allowing me to be a part of this event today and having the opportunity to talk with our 4 esteemed panelists, who I would like to introduce right now. Our first panelist today is Javier Becerra, Secretary of U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Please welcome Secretary Becerra. Also joining us is Dr. Miguel A. Cardona, Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education. Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Also with us is Isabella Casillas Guzman, the Administrator of U.S. Small Business Administration. Welcome. Welcome to all of you. Please have a seat. And everybody, I think you have a mic on your seat. How this is going to work is we're going to talk here for hopefully 20 plus minutes, and then you two will have an opportunity to ask some questions of our four panelists today. You should have some note cards on your table, and so if you think of a question, just jot it down. There'll be people, members here who will be collecting those cards and then passing along your questions to us here on the stage. So let's just dive right in, and I want to take a quick moment to start us off of just looking around. I mean, look at each other. To be here on this stage together, to have Latinos with more influence right now in this country than ever before because of the positions of leadership that you all hold. In just a few words, if you will, talk to me about what this moment means to you personally and to your families.
Ana, thank you very much first, and to Marco and the CHCI, thank you for getting us together. We were talking, this is the first time the four of us have been together outside of a cabinet meeting with the president this way, so it's great that CHCI gathers us together to have a chance to be with you. Pride, to get to see three colleagues who are accomplishing tremendous things in very important positions, great deal of pride, not enough, because we got to see more, so hurry up because we're only in these seats for a little while. And finally, thankful that I had Maria Teresa and Manuel as parents to guide me forward. I had a strong partner in Carolina and my three daughters, so very fortunate, glad to be with you.
Thank you. And thank you, Ana. You too are un orgullo Latino. And what you do and what you represent on the air for the whole country is something that we all are proud of as well.
Muchas gracias.
Sí. And for me, look, the sacrifice de mis abuelos when they left the paradise of Puerto Rico for the projects of Connecticut. Any Boricuas here? All right, we got a couple. Look, all of us are descendants of someone who sacrificed much more than we have had to so that these doors open for us. And I say we, all of us in this room, are an example that immigrants get the job done, we add value to this country, and we're here to stay.
So, Ana, I would echo the sentiments expressed already. It's just, I have to say, I am overwhelmed by looking out and seeing a huge number of future cabinet members out in the audience today. And it's our job to make sure that that opportunity and potential is realized, and that's what it's all about, making tomorrow better than today.
Well, and echoes of all of my colleagues, yes. Echoes of all of my colleagues, but also huge hope in the future. And I started in DC as an intern for CHCI back in 1988, so quite some time ago. But I was in your seat. So it is possible, and here in my position, I'm the highest ranking Latino on the economy, and to be able to look at the hopeful future of entrepreneurship from the lens of my father, who was an entrepreneur, from my grandmother, who was an entrepreneur, and the multi-generations of Tejanos that are in my background is just remarkable. We feel very proud. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much. Again, congratulations for reaching this height that you're at right now. And I want to know more about your personal stories. I'm sure so many in this room are aspiring to be in your shoes and your seat someday. Let me start with you, Secretary Mayorkas. You are the first Latino to head the Department of Homeland Security. You are the first immigrant to hold that role as well. I wonder if you think of any key experiences that you think helped you to get on the journey to being in this role?
So a couple things, if I may. First of all, because I am an immigrant, and because we fled the country of my birth and my father's birth, Cuba, I understand the challenge of displacement, the fragility of the immigrant experience in the United States, and also profoundly understand our obligation to strengthen that experience. I also have to say that it takes a community working together to see the advancement of an individual who represents the community. Back in 1997, I was in Los Angeles, California. We traveled from Cuba to Miami, Miami to Los Angeles in my father's search for really a new beginning. And it was Congressman Javier Becerra who fought for my nomination for my first political appointment as the United States Attorney on behalf of the community of which he was a part and a proud leader. So it takes a community of action to propel a community into the future.
Did you ever think you would see yourself in this position?
I did not have the arrogance to think that. I will say that there is no substitute for hard work and a commitment to a purpose. Those two things can really combine to bring surprising results.
Administrator Guzman, you mentioned that you are the highest ranking Latina right now in the U.S. government, and you are only the 5th Latina ever to hold a cabinet position.
That's right.
Applause, please.
Yeah.
Need to be more of us. Come on, ladies.
What inherent challenge comes with that opportunity and responsibility?
Well, obviously, I try to, in everything I do, represent my family and my values and growing up in an entrepreneurial family in my work. But it weighs heavily. I've always grown up being an advocate for others around me, trying to be that voice. I saw my mother being the voice for her children in schools and speaking up to help us advance. And I've always taken that role very seriously. So for me, being able to have this opportunity to lead an agency that's impacting the 5 million Latino entrepreneurs out there in this economy is transformational, because we need to be able to experience and share our experiences, to meet businesses, to meet our communities where they are, and that's the president's vision. And so I do bring with me all my experiences, my relationships, and my understanding of underserved communities to the table. And it's a great honor to have my own unique path, because I think we do get here in a unique path. We don't think of ourselves in these roles to begin with. We're just doing the work that we have passion about, and for me, it was small business.
Secretary Becerra, you are the first Latino to helm the Department of Health and Human Services. Do you feel, I feel like we're going to be clapping all day, right? Do you feel more pressure because of that?
No, not really, because it's a big job to begin with, whether you're the first or the last. It's just important to do it well. And fortunately, the president and Congress in the first 2 years gave us some pretty good tools. Nearly 700 million COVID shots have gone into the arms of Americans. That's never been done in the history of a country. We are seeing more people in America work than ever before. Latinos have the highest rate of employment in the history of the country. From the health department, there are more Americans today who are insured than ever before. That's because Latinos and blacks are now more insured than ever before. And we have more than 300 million Americans who today have their own insurance, private or public, and go into a doctor or hospital with dignity when they need to take their child because they have insurance. So yeah, lots of pressure to get it right, but I'd rather be there than not. So it's good.
But I guess on a personal level, how do you bring your full self, including your Hispanic identity, into the role and make sure that, yes, you are wanting to serve all Americans clearly to the best of your ability, but obviously because of the perspective and personal experience you have, that's just something that is added to that role, right? And additional responsibility perhaps that's on the front of your mind when it comes to making sure the Latino population in this country is taken care of.
No doubt. When I got sworn in, we were already beginning to see the typical trend on vaccination, that white community was getting vaccinated, black and brown community was not. May or so of 2021, about 60% of all white American adults had received at least one shot. less than 50% of Black American adults and less than 50% of Latino American adults had received a shot. But by the time we ended the year, 90% of white American adults had received at least one vaccine, 90% of Black adults had, 90% of Latino, 90% of Asian, 90% of Native American. We made sure that we erased the disparity that started up, because instead of waiting for folks to come to the vaccine, we went to where they were to give them that vaccine. So I take with me what I learned from my parents. My dad used to say, si me puedo levantar y ir a trabajar el próximo día, es un buen día. And for him, it was real, because if he didn't go to work, there was not a lot of money to put food on the table. And they always told me, tienes que tener ganas cuando haces algo. And, you know, to me, ganas is guts, grit, and game all packaged in one. And you better pack that. I know I got that. And then finally, the saying that always, to me, means so much is, cada uno puede poner su granito de arena. Because I think my parents wanted to show me that no matter how humble your origins, you got that grain of sand and you can make that mountain grow. And so all of us can put that granito de arena there. And I think we now reflect that in what we do to make sure everyone has a chance. Tienen la oportunidad de poner su granito de arena.
And so Dr. Cardona, Secretary Cardona, my dad is also a PhD, and he always, as I grew up, was made sure I introduced him as Dr. Cabrera to my friends. My first boyfriend was like, I couldn't introduce him as Mr. Cabrera. If I did introduce him as Dr. Cabrera, that was a big deal, because it meant so much to him, his level of education. And so I want to talk a little about representation in education. You've held all kinds of leadership roles as a teacher, as a principal, as a superintendent of schools, to this position you helm now. And you have talked about how 50% of students are students of color, and yet only 20% of educators are teachers of color. Why does that matter so much? And what are the barriers preventing that number from being so much higher right now?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. You know, it's hard to be what you can't see. And we have a responsibility to make sure that we diversify the profession. You know, and that goes to making sure that as we're hiring folks, we're giving them space to be their authentic selves, whether they're classroom teachers or school principals. You know, I remember going to school myself as a youngster, at home, Miguel, but at school, Michael. The true story. And I remember in 7th grade, going into the office after I asked my mom, I said, Mom, what does it say on the birth certificate? She said, Miguel. So I went to the school, and I said, from now on, por favor, llámame Miguel, not Michael. And there was that sense of connection. And oftentimes in the profession, and as you move up the ranks, people feel like they have to assimilate and give up who they are. My message is, you don't change your stripes. It's those stripes that we need to make sure that our schools reflect the beautiful diversity of our country. You know, sometimes it is challenging, and I think, you know, sometimes we have to allow our educators of Latino descent to add a little adobo into the schools, because it needs a little bit more, so that our students could see that they could be their true and authentic selves. It also helps if we do a better job, which we've started doing, implementing public service loan forgiveness, paying student teachers, and making sure we have pathways into the profession, which is the work that we're trying to do at the Department of Education. Our country is beautifully diverse, and I feel like we have so much untapped talent, which is why we're opening doors to higher education like never before. And we're making sure that college is not going to be a lifetime of debt, so we could get more Latinos into the classrooms, leading schools and leading districts.
I have a follow-up question for you, as I want to kind of transition into talking more about some of the key issues facing the Hispanic community that are in each of your areas. So let's just start there with education. I think, you know, again, I mentioned my own family story and how education has been such a key to our success and has been a priority for my grandfather, my dad, who both ended up being professors, and then my dad was a K-12 educator up to superintendency, as well as being the superintendent of schools in Colorado. And right now, the cost of higher education is a big barrier for some people. And even after you get that education, trying to pay back those loans is a problem. I think the latest statistics show that the average student borrower owes about $30,000 in student loan debt right now, and so these loan payments are about to kick back in after a pause during the pandemic. What do we know about the link between race and financial mobility and ability to afford college? And what are you doing right now to address that rising cost so that people aren't priced out?
The system is broken. And unfortunately, Latinos historically in this country are not able to access higher education the way they should because the system is broken. And we're working to fix that. Look, the president's targeted debt relief plan would have had 1 out of every 2 Latinos in this country's debt forgiven totally. 1 out of every 2, but the Supreme Court turned that down. So to me, that goes to show that not only are we trying to make higher education more affordable and make it more accessible to Latinos, but we're also trying to address a racial wealth gap in this country that we seem to normalize in this country. So what are we doing? Number one, we're going to continue to fight for debt relief. We introduced the best income-driven repayment plan so that more folks can access higher education. I once spoke to a Dominican young boy in my office when I was in a district. He was in 6th grade, one of the smartest kids I had in my school when I was school principal. And his father and him were in my office, and they were like, oh, he's not going to college, it's too expensive. And this was one of the smartest kids I had in my school. But they already turned off the idea of college because of the cost. So we're making the income-driven repayment plan. It's called a SAVE plan. Check it out if you haven't yet. We're fixing public service loan forgiveness. We're going after colleges that take advantage of first-gen students by telling them they're going to give them all these certificates and then leave them in debt with a low-paying job. And we're also working on apprenticeships, too, to make sure that for those who want to go into public service, they have more apprenticeships available to them. So this administration has, from day one, tried to fix a broken loan system and make higher education more accessible.
Ana, can I say something building on what Miguel said? You know, I remember in the mid-'90s, I visited my great aunt and uncle, also from Cuba, in their apartment in Brooklyn, and we had little sandwiches. And the sandwiches were wrapped in wax paper. I don't know how many of you know of that textile. But it was wax paper. And after I finished my sandwich, I bundled up the wax paper to throw out. And my great aunt looked at me horrified. And she took the wax paper and evened it out. And I noticed then that it was cut in a perfect square. And she took that wrinkled perfect square and put it on top of the refrigerator, on top of a stack of perfectly cut squares of wax paper. She was a seamstress. My great uncle was a machinist. Every penny mattered, and they didn't have very many of them. That is the money that government spends. That very carefully saved money. The 4 of us here understand that profoundly. Number one, in terms of the care that we take with what we do. And secondly, we work very, very hard to reach that individual and make sure that the services that we provide are accessible to that individual who has to cut that square of wax paper and place it on the refrigerator for another day. And that access means an openness and equality in the service of government programs. It also means language access. My great aunt and uncle did not speak a great English. And so our backgrounds very much inform what we do, how we do it, and the very basic principle of for whom we are doing it. And it is a very inclusive answer to that.
Administrator Guzman, I know your family background is entrepreneurial, and obviously I think all of us can relate to that entrepreneur spirit that almost seems inherent in the Hispanic culture, as well as the work ethic. You talked about grit, Secretary Becerra, and that's a word that rings true in my family and those I know in our culture. My great-grandfather, my abuelo's side, came to the U.S. and started his own little eatery in California, and that's where, again, they started building those roots and some stability for financial success here. Right now, we know there are some 5 million Hispanic-owned small businesses in the U.S., and I can't help but wonder, given all the technological advancement we're seeing with AI, with inflation, with behemoths like Amazon, how do small businesses compete?
Well, and that's cornerstone for Bidenomics, is making sure that there's competition in this country, and small businesses are the competition. You know, we need to ensure that the next generation of innovators, of makers, of Main Street businesses have the support that they need to be able to succeed and make the products and services that we all depend on every day in our neighborhoods and our manufacturing centers and our innovation centers. And those 5 million Latino businesses are strong and growing. They produce over $800 billion for our economy, and we see that their startup rates are 10 times any other community. We are highly entrepreneurial, but we oftentimes face barriers, and the Biden-Harris administration has prioritized reducing those friction points so that our entrepreneurs can access the capital, get the funding that they need to start and grow, because they could create more jobs and they could produce more output at par with their peers if they could get affordable capital. Right now, they're working harder at higher interest rates to produce in their businesses and still performing. We know that they need the know-how, the technical assistance, how to navigate capital markets, but also how to connect to the enormous opportunities that we are seeing in the economy right now. With the historic and unprecedented investments in America, there has been over $500 billion in private investments trying to spur manufacturing and innovation in our country. There's been over $333 billion of infrastructure spent. That means more contracts for our small businesses to be able to create more jobs and produce more. So in order for them to connect to the Invest in America agenda, we've been focusing on making sure that they have the capital is king, and the networks of support that were funded in the American Rescue Plan, so that we would never see an instance like we did in PPP in 2020, where Latino entrepreneurs were less likely to get the funding at all or less than what they asked for at high rates. And so with the Biden administration, we fixed that. Latinos were able to achieve more equity within our COVID relief programs, and now we see them starting and growing at incredible rates. And I do believe that when we talk about the contributions of Latinos, we are so highly entrepreneurial, and the opportunities are endless for us to use entrepreneurship as a pathway to building wealth for our families, for our communities. And we've seen through the SBA, Qualcomm, Build-A-Bear, Apple, Tesla, all these incredible companies come through leveraging our programs, and now we're looking for those next generation of Latino founders who are going to become the future industries and the future behemoths in our economy.
As a journalist, I have so many follow-up questions for each of you, and I know we have such a limited amount of time, so I'm just going to plow forward here, because I think one of the things you said just makes me think about how America is this land of opportunity, and that's how this country is described. It's how I think so many people in need see this country from other countries where there is less. And just look at what we're seeing happening along the border right now, Secretary Mayorkas. We've been reporting on another surge of migrants at the border, overwhelming some of these border towns, even some of the big cities where migrants are being bused now. This week, we reported that children were being separated from their parents this summer and their guardians this summer at the border, at least in the initial intake, because the border facilities just didn't have the space. And I know it was done on a sort of case-by-case basis, but the fact that that's happening is of concern, naturally. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to address that. Is that still happening, and what solutions are you working on?
So it's very important, Anna, to communicate quite clearly that we ended the cruel policy of family separation that existed in the prior administration. And in fact, we have reunified more than 700 of the separated families, and that has been a very big focus of the task force. What you speak of is a couple instances, a few instances in a particular facility where a child had to be separated from the parent, given the fact that we were grouping adults and children separately in that facility because of the crowding in that facility, but the parent and the child were brought together before either of them departed. In fact, they departed together. So that's a very, very different situation, taking into account the safety of children in a Border Patrol facility.
Is that still happening?
That is a suboptimal procedural mechanism that we will use to safeguard children in a facility during a crowded period in time, because what one does not necessarily want is children grouping together in a small room with grown-ups overnight.
Okay, and what kind of adjustments then are being made in terms of when we talk about solutions to this ongoing, some people call it a humanitarian crisis because of the number of migrants that are coming across right now and the limited resources?
So, what we consider to be a humanitarian crisis is what the people endure on the journey to the border in the hands of smugglers. We see so much trauma, so much tragedy, and that is why it is the focus of this administration to build lawful pathways for individuals to access, to be able to realize the country of opportunity that America is, without placing their lives and their life savings in the hands of smugglers. That has been the focus of our attention, really to allow them access to their legal rights here in the United States without taking a perilous journey.
Secretary Becerra, let's talk about women's health care and reproductive rights specifically. Obviously, that's front and center right now in the political debate, and as we look at the upcoming election, there's been a lot of talk about abortion. Latinas are among the most impacted by state efforts to restrict abortion when you look at the demographics. So I wonder, in the year plus since that Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, with all the state legislative actions around abortion that have taken place, what are the measurable impacts you're seeing?
A woman who lives in a state that now denies her access to abortion services is 2 to 3 times more likely now to die of a complication of pregnancy than is a woman who lives in a state where they do have access to abortion services. Not just because they have access to abortion services, because typically what happens is you begin to restrict access to health services that women need that go beyond just abortion services. And so what we're finding is that more and more women are having to leave their state to access services, which is okay if you've got the money. But as you just said, Anna, the majority, the vast majority of women who are going to be impacted detrimentally by the Dobbs decision are women of color. Are women who are low income, are women who don't have many means, are women who don't have the opportunity to have someone take care of the rest of the family while they travel to some other state to try to get services they need, are women who already had limited access to health care, decent health care services. And so we're doing everything we can to make it possible for women to get their services, whether it is in their home state or whether it's outside, making sure we protect contraceptive services, and making sure that if we find out that a woman's right has been violated to receive her health care, that we take action, as we have in several cases of hospitals in the state of Missouri and state of Kansas, where a woman had tried to go in to get services and was denied by that hospital, even though she was in an emergency circumstance, which by federal law, she's entitled to get whatever service she needs during that emergency, including abortion services.
What's next in the fight?
I hope I don't get dinged for saying this, but come November 2024, hopefully the fight will go well enough that we won't find more states trying to restrict access to essential health care. In fact, we'll go the opposite direction of actually instituting in law the protections for women in state statutes, and then get back to getting Congress and others to restore the rights that every person should have. I mean, female, male, whatever. No one should be denied rights. That's really up to us. I don't trust some of these state courts.
I know we, again, need to move on to the next questions. So let me turn to some of our questions from the audience with the few minutes that we have left in our panel today. This question is, how have your unique backgrounds and experiences as Latinos influenced your policy decisions and priorities in your current roles? And in what ways do you believe the Biden administration's approach to healthcare, education, small businesses, homeland security differs from the previous Trump administrations, particularly in addressing the needs of diverse communities across the United States? Who wants to take that one?
Well, we can go on for an hour on the last part of that because it's a marked difference. Look, if there's anything you remember that I say today, it's this. Your bilingualism and your biculturalism is your superpower. It's your superpower. Use it. And to get to the first part of that question, I was taught early on, whether it was doing parrandas or listening to Felipe Rodriguez or whatever, be proud of who you are. That biculturalism, that code switching that you're able to do, use it to your benefit. We are here because we were able to understand how to code switch, culture switch, navigate different spaces. And I'm telling you, you have that superpower. So as you're thinking, how could I use that? I'm very honest. My connection to my identidad latina is part of the reason why I'm here. It's part of the reason why I'm here. I never gave up, my culture, my familial background, my understanding what it's like to grow up with very little. I moved 7 times before I was 13 years old. I was born rich with no material possessions. I had family, I had cultura, I had faith. So embrace that, not as a deficit, but as an asset. And don't change your stripes as you're putting on the suit or the uniform. So listen to your Alejandro Fernandez or Peso Pluma or Mark Anthony. Have your tamales at work. Don't change who you are. And this administration embraces that. The president said we want a cabinet that looks like America. Well, you got that. And that's why we are here. His policies, her policies, and my policies reflect, we know there's so much untapped talent out there in education. And we're unapologetic about being who we are. Celebrate your biculturalism and your bilingualism.
And just adding on to that, we know that diverse teams outperform, period. It's statistically proven. And so it's great to be part of the most diverse cabinet in history, but we need to think about that. And as a Latina, being able to see what my communities bring to the table, knowing that diverse communities are what's going to power our economy into this future, are what's going to make us more globally competitive, come up with ideas from national security to healthcare to education. We need all of our great ideas from everywhere and anywhere. So it's tapping into those opportunities, expecting and believing that anything is possible from anyone, and you should not be excluded or prevented from achieving that American dream.
Let me ask you the follow-up that actually comes in a question here, Administrator Guzman. What actions have you taken to assess Latino employment rates and address low participation rates?
Yeah, well, we've seen historic highs for Latino participation as well as Latino unemployment, and we know that those Latino businesses are creating jobs, and oftentimes in the communities that reflect us. And so, investing in them at equal rates of their peers, being able to access capital so that they could create the jobs for our community, the good-paying jobs for our community, is what we've focused on. It's all about capital and making sure that we can play the game of capitalism and make it work for our communities.
Secretary Becerra, this is a question for you. What does your vision for a healthier America and Latino community look like?
So it's no different than the vision for anyone in this country. It's moving away from a system where we treat illness to a system where we promote wellness. And so we start from the very beginning. And so that means our children should have access to the food they need. There should be no communities that have food deserts where you can't buy fruits and vegetables at a decent price for your family. It means that no one should be unhoused, because if you're unhoused, how can you be healthy? How can you be mentally strong? It means that when they go to school, these kids go to school, they are ready to learn because they have food in their stomach. It means that we're doing everything we must. As again, my mom mom would always say, mejor prevenir que remediar. Better to prevent than to remediate. Or Frederick Douglass said it really well too. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. We're in the business of repairing broken men in this country way too much. We should be promoting building strong children all the time. And that means giving them a chance for a healthy start. So for us, it's about building more and more a wellness system of care. And that's why we're all about food is medicine. We believe that food should be treated like medicine because the prescription you get out there for your child shouldn't be the pills. It should be the fruits and berries and the nuts and things that make your kid hit strong from the beginning.
Ana, you asked how we distinguish this administration from the prior one. I would try to encapsulate it as follows. We're incredibly proud of our country's identity as a nation of immigrants. That is, I think, the differentiating factor.
And so we've reached nearly the end, and I want to make sure we give a chance to have each of you at least offer some closing remarks. And I'll just plant this question for you to think about in addressing in those closing remarks. There's obviously a growing Hispanic population in this country. What's your advice for how the Hispanic community can better engage with government to make sure its needs and priorities are addressed? Why don't you start for us, Secretary Becerra?
I'll be real crass and say we're hiring at the Department of Health and Human Services. I would love to see all of you apply because by the time we're done, I'd like to say that the Department of Health and Human Services is the most diverse department in the federal government. I think we may already be, but I want to make sure before I leave that's the case. And at the same time, we happen to rank number 2 in all the government in terms of the department that's you most want to work for. And we'd be number 1 if we could also send women and men to the moon because NASA is the only place that beats us. And so I hope that you will take me up on the offer because at the end of the day, you've got someone who wants to see the diversity of our country reflected in our government, and we've been given the license by our president to do that. So please apply. We've got some great positions. I'd love to see you working at the Department of Health and Human Services.
I know Secretary Mayorkas, go ahead and jump in. You were ready to start next.
No, I was going to say
we'll
exactly
just bounce
what
back
Javier,
and forth.
I was going to say exactly what Javier said in terms of come be a part of government. That is the best way to ensure that government works best. I will also say this, that the most important business card one has is the work that leaves one's desk.
Any final thoughts from you, Administrator Guzman?
Well, President Biden always defines America in one word, possibilities. And I think imagining endless possibilities for yourselves and remembering that we are, in the Latino community, strong in service. We serve in the military, and we need to step up our service and federal service. And so we hope that many of you, especially in the economic front, join government because the future of our economy is dependent on diverse thought and diverse ideas and inclusiveness.
Yeah, and I'll be very brief, just to say, I think only 4% of federal employees are Latino, and we need you. We need you. And I know Javier said I was throwing a pitch there. Could the folks from the Department of Education stand up? So see them before you leave, because we're hiring too. But I guess my message is, look, we do need you, but come as you are. Don't feel like you have to change your stripes to get into a position. This is your Washington, D.C. This is your government, and this is your country. You belong. Come as you are.
Well, thank you all, Secretary Becerra, Secretary Cardona, Secretary Mayorkas, and Administrator Guzman for that conversation, for your time today. You're all inspirational to all of us, and I hope all of you had an opportunity to really take away some key thoughts, some ideas, some inspiration, and hopefully some, motivation to continue to grow in your journeys and reach for your dreams and those leadership opportunities to have a bigger impact in your communities and our country as well. Thank you again for being here and for the opportunity to be part of the event today. Hope the rest of the conference goes really well, and wish you safe travels wherever you're going next. Thanks.